Welcome to the Westport Library. Today's program will begin momentarily. Supported by Verso Studios, created locally and shared with the world.
Good evening and welcome to the presentation United Against Hate. My name is Brian McGonigal and I'm the founder of Westport PRIDE. We have an exciting, thank you. We have a really exciting presentation this evening, and we'll be speaking with members of from local law enforcement all the way through to the federal level. I'd like to just ask that there be no live streaming or video recording of the event this evening. We do not have permission for presenting this presentation in that format. So if you're with the media, we just ask that you refrain from that, and if you have a personal streaming, that you refrain from that as well. And so, without ado, I'd like to invite David Heath to the stage. He can introduce the program itself and talk a little bit about what we're going to be hearing tonight. So, thank you everyone again for being here, and look forward to the conversation.
Good evening. My name is David Heath, and among other things, I'm a graduate of Staples High School. Yep, thank you very much. I grew up in Westport and was very active in the Staples Players and the Staples Orphenians. So I spent a lot of time in the 4 building. I think it's still called that, right? Many thanks to Brian McGonigal, Carrie Golowick, Garlick, and everyone with Westport PRIDE, the Westport Library, and our law enforcement partners for helping us prepare this important conversation this evening. I work for Connecticut's U.S. Attorney's Office as a paralegal specialist in the National Security and Cyber Crimes Unit. Now, beyond my duties in the criminal division, I've been very busy with my colleagues on community outreach for a long time now. Within the Department of Justice, I've served as vice president and currently sit on the board of directors of DOJ PRIDE, which is the department's employee affinity group for lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender employees. And the DOJ PRIDE board, works with department leadership to convene events that interest our members and allies. Every June, the Attorney General delivers remarks at the Department of Justice LGBTQ Pride Month event held in DC. In October of 2019, DOJ PRIDE joined with the FBI and ATF to present an LGBTQ History Month event featuring openly gay members of the FBI who were deployed to Orlando, Florida as part of the law enforcement response to the Pulse nightclub shooting. The panelists told powerful stories about how they, as both FBI employees and openly gay people, were uniquely situated to help victims and families begin to heal following that awful tragedy. A recording of that event is now part of the DOJ's permanent lineup of diversity training videos, which is available to all employees. DOJ PRIDE also hosts an annual awards event where we honor outstanding contributions to the LGBTQ community, both within the DOJ and in the broader community nationwide. Now, on the community outreach front back here in Connecticut, I serve as the LGBTQ community liaison. In that role, I work with the U.S. Attorney, lawyers and staff, law enforcement officials, and community leaders to convene events and meetings, like this one, that address key issues such as queer visibility, public safety, community policing, and ultimately equality under the law. Much of our outreach work addresses the relationship between community members and law enforcement officers, such as providing training for Connecticut's Police Academy on LGBTQ+ cultural issues. So, our keynote speaker, Vanessa Roberts Avery, became the 54th U.S. Attorney for the District of Connecticut in April 2022. She is also the first African-American woman to serve as Connecticut's U.S. Attorney. From January 2019 to April 2022, she served as the Associate Attorney General and Chief of the Division of Enforcement and Public Protection at the Connecticut office of the Attorney General. She had previously served as an assistant U.S. attorney in the office's civil division from 2014 to 2019. She is a graduate of Yale University and the Georgetown University Law Center, as well as a New Haven native and a graduate of New Haven Public Schools. Under her leadership, the U.S. Attorney's Office prioritizes combating, among other things, gun violence, fentanyl and opioid trafficking, hate crimes, child exploitation and human trafficking, financial fraud, cybercrime, and national security issues. In achieving these objectives, U.S. Attorney Avery places great emphasis on utilizing community engagement to build bridges and enhance communication between law enforcement and communities served. Assistant U.S. attorneys and staff regularly appear at schools and communities around the state regarding anti-violence initiatives, opioid dangers, civil rights and hate crimes prevention, human trafficking, cyber crimes, as well as engaging in programs such as Public Safe Childhood, Project Safe Neighborhoods, Project Longevity, and the Federal Reentry Court and Support Court programs. So tonight's United Against Hate program is a prototypical engagement event where LGBTQ community members and law enforcement officers will work together to combat hate crimes and hate incidents. So it is my honor and my privilege to introduce you to Connecticut's U.S. Attorney, Vanessa Roberts Avery.
Thank you, David, for that wonderful introduction to our work and to my career path. I am delighted to be here tonight and delighted to greet you all as the United States Attorney for the District of Connecticut. Again, especially for those who I haven't met yet, my name is Vanessa Roberts Avery. My pronouns are she and her. I consider myself both an ally and an advocate of the LGBTQ+ community. It is a personal and professional passion of mine that we support the efforts and safeguard civil rights in this community. And so I want to start tonight by just highlighting first that this is a safe space. And I want to talk about that. By a show of hands, how many of you understand and have experience with operating outside of your comfort zone? Anybody in this room? Okay. I know a thing about that too. And I'll talk about that in a moment. Everyone who has partnered to bring this event to you tonight wants to make sure that you understand that this is a safe space and that we can talk about how we can create that safe space outside of this room when we leave here. To any people in the audience who may be from the transgender and gender nonconforming community, I want to speak to you directly for a moment. We are aware of research suggesting that members of the LGBT+ community most likely to be victims of violent crime are transgender people. That is something that we are keeping our eye on in Connecticut. We support the protection of civil rights for all people in this state. And we have no tolerance for hate crimes here. We work to protect the public safety for all people and communities, including those who feel vulnerable and marginalized. So I want to talk to you a little bit about my story. I was having a conversation with someone shortly before we officially started, and he said to me, "I've read your bio, but I want to know who you are. What's your story?" And that's something that I often say to people as well. I grew up in New Haven, as you heard. I grew up in the New Hallville section of New Haven, which is the inner city, during the height of the crack epidemic, during the peak of gun violence in the early 90s. And I know what it's like to live in a community where law enforcement wasn't necessarily a welcome face in the community, let's just say. There were people in the community who feared law enforcement. There were people who may have even despised law enforcement. but I have the pleasure in my role over the course of my time as an attorney to also understand that law enforcement is a wonderful partner in helping to safeguard communities and to help protect civil rights. And so you're going to hear a lot about that here tonight from various members of my office who are here, and I hope that you take something very valuable away with you. I want to share just a few more facts about our office, because a lot of times people don't really understand the difference between the U.S. Attorney's Office and the Attorney General's Office and the Chief State's Attorney's Office, and I see some heads nodding in the back. The good news is, especially here in Connecticut, we're all partners. We collaborate often and regularly, so you don't have to sort it all out yourselves. But I want to talk about the U.S. Attorney's Office in particular. So we are at the federal level. I report to the United States Attorney, Merrick Garland, who's down in Washington, D.C., and I was appointed to this position by President Biden and confirmed by the U.S. Senate. So that is one thing that distinguishes my role and our office's role from some of the other folks who you may be more familiar with. Our U.S. Attorney's Office is one of the oldest in the nation. I always like to share the fact that President George Washington appointed the first U.S. Attorney for Connecticut back in 1789. So as you heard David share earlier, I am the 54th United States Attorney for this district, and we are very proud of our tradition as an office and the work we do inside the courtroom and outside of the courtroom, and we're hoping to expand upon that as we go. As the Chief Representative of the U.S. Attorney's Office in Connecticut, I have the great honor and privilege to lead an office of approximately 130 people, including 68 Assistant United States Attorneys and another 60 or so staff in 3 offices, New Haven, Bridgeport, and Hartford. So if there's anyone in the room who happened to pop in and you live in a different part of the state, you can reach us there too. Many people don't know that the Justice Department itself was founded in 1870. So after our office here in Connecticut was formed, there was a National Justice Department created in 1870 with the first principal purpose of protecting civil rights. In fact, it was specifically and principally created to protect the rights of Black Americans under the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, and in particular, fighting against white supremacists and others who were trying to deprive them of the right to vote. So that tradition of protecting civil rights goes back to the very founding of the department. And today, the task of confronting hate-fueled violence remains central to the mission of the Justice Department nationally, and it is a top priority for us here in Connecticut. Our mission is simply to do justice, and we do that in 3 principal ways. 1 is to uphold the rule of law. 2 is to do what we can to help protect our communities and the safety of our communities. And 3 is the reason we're here tonight, to safeguard civil rights. Needless to say, I believe that our work is some of the most important work and meaningful work that is done in the state today. We prosecute all federal crimes in Connecticut and represent the federal government and its officials and agencies and all civil litigation here. And we are here because we know that prosecution and investigations alone are not enough to address the issues that we have, not even in this space, and that we want to try to get out ahead of them. And we really focus on prevention. And we need your help and your partnership in that effort. Community engagement, as you already heard, is so integral to what we do. And our intention is to become a regular and familiar presence in communities around this state. So again, for those of you who I haven't met yet, I hope that I have a chance to interact with you a little bit later in the program. I hope that you have an opportunity to meet and interact with everyone here from our office and all of the partners. There are a number of partners who brought this program together tonight. I hope that you have an opportunity to do that and that we have an opportunity to do it again after today. The United Against Hate Initiative, which you're going to hear more about, is a nationwide DOJ initiative. There are United Against Hate events in all 94 districts. There are 94 federal districts. So all of the states and every territory of the federal government has a U.S. Attorney's Office, and this will be rolled out, if it hasn't already, in all of those districts, probably by the end of next year. Our purpose in this initiative is to build bridges. We don't want anyone to feel marginalized. We don't want anyone to feel disconnected. And so thinking back to feeling like you're outside of your comfort zone, when you come to a place where you want help and you need help, or you're advocating on behalf of a neighbor or someone else you know who needs help, we want you to feel that you're in the right place, that you're safe, and that you're welcome. And we especially don't want anyone to ever feel deterred from reporting. And you're going to hear a lot about that tonight. You're going to learn the difference between hate crimes and hate incidents. And we hope that you will walk away with some understanding of that. But if nothing else, this will be repeated again. Report, always report. When in doubt, report. Lastly, before I close, I want to say again that this is a safe space. Everyone from the U.S. Attorney's Office and all of our partners here tonight are working to create that for you here in this room, and also hope that you will work with us to help create that safe space all around the state. Thank you very much. And at this time, I'd like to welcome all of the panelists to the stage. Thank you.
Bright lights up here. Welcome, everybody. It is so good to see you tonight. I'm very happy that you are all here. Even you guys way up there on the top tier, welcome. So, we are here for United Against Hate. And as you've heard, we're going to be talking about hate crimes, hate incidents, hate speech, and you're going to learn a lot in the course of this presentation. So, one of the things that we're going to do before we get started is talk a little bit about what you're going to hear. You're going to hear about identifying hate crimes and hate incidents. You're going to learn about reporting hate crimes and why it is so essential, but why it's also essential to report hate incidents. And you're going to hear about preventing hate crimes. So before we get into the meat of the matter, I want to say a couple of things. This is going to be a presentation where we are asking you for your input, for your interactivity, for your thoughts and your imagination and your work. And so in this space, it is a safe space. We want everyone to feel safe, to share your thoughts, share your ideas, brainstorm with us, brainstorm with each other. I'll tell you right now, I'm going to ask you guys to talk to your neighbors during this presentation. But one of the things is, if you have a question, you're not the only one. It is probably because somebody else in the audience has that same question, maybe 2 or 3 people. So do not be shy about asking your questions. It makes it better for everybody. Also, what'll make it better for everybody is if everybody puts their cell phones on silence, because that won't interrupt or distract other people as you're listening to the presentation tonight. So, without further ado, I'm going to tell you about this impressive array of folks who are sitting up here willing to talk with you about hate crimes, hate speech, and hate incidents. We have Bill Brown. Bill Brown is from the United States Attorney's Office, and I would love to tell you about his very impressive background. But for right now, I'm going to confine myself to telling you that he is in charge of the civil rights section in the United States Attorney's Office. He and I are counterparts. I'm the coordinator for criminal civil rights, and he's the coordinator for civil rights on the civil side of the U.S. Attorney's Office. Next to him is Michael Butch. Michael Butch is the Assistant Special Agent in charge of the FBI here in Connecticut. We are lucky to have him back from Stockholm. He did a lot of fantastic work. You're going to hear about some of it during the presentation. And he has been outreach and building bridges with community is near and dear to his heart. And you're going to hear a little bit about that. We've done that together for, since about 2014? Yeah. Next to him is Detective Alvin Chen. So over there. Detective Alvin Chen is with the Connecticut State Police, and he's with the Hate Crimes Unit. This is a relatively new, specifically directed unit within the state police. And he's going to talk to you a little bit about his duties and how he expects them to expand over time. And next to Detective Chen is, Michael Nemec. Michael Nemec is an assistant state's attorney from the state's attorney's office, and he works very closely with the folks that are next to him. The folks that are next to him are, there we go, Chief James Walsh from the Norwalk Police Department. Thanks for coming tonight, Chief. And also next to him is Deputy Chief Ryan Paulson from right next door, the Westport Police Department. And of course, we are rounded out by being joined by Chief Fody Koskinas. Thank you, Chief. And I'm gonna turn the floor over to you very briefly.
All right, thank you. First of all, welcome to Westport. Welcome to the Westport Library. Thank you. It's great to see you all out here. Briefly, I do want to say, I'm going to take advantage of this, Anastasia. Thank you. If you don't think we take this seriously, all three of our select women are here. Jen Tooker is here, Andrea Moore is here, Candace Savin is here. Also, Harold Bailey, who represents Team Westport, our diversity group, is here, and the incredible support we've seen on all levels. I do want to say, Brian, thank you. Thank you for including us, and thank you for putting this together. From the beginning, when the first meeting that you put together, we could see where this was going. Again, this is so important to get all our stakeholders in the same room, to get our community in the same room, to get RTM elected officials from Westport, people from Team Westport. It's impressive to see the participation. There's a cheer from our Board of Education. I realize this is much bigger and it's the first one that's being done in the area, but to see community members involved is extremely important. We could get the most important people up here. If you're not part of it, it's not important anymore. So I want to say thank you to all of you. I also do want to apologize. I'm trying to take the latest flight out of here for DC for another meeting tomorrow, and I have the utmost confidence that representing the police department, Deputy Chief Paulson speaks the same language. So I'll be here for about another 10 minutes. You can grab me on the way out if you need me specifically. Email, phone calls, I promise I'll answer every single one of them, whether it's Westport related or not. But I'm excited to be here. Thank you for putting it together, and I'm looking forward to the next few minutes for me and the next hour for you guys. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. And at the very end, we're going to put up contact information for these folks, and Chief Koskinas said he means it. His email address is up there, and you should feel free to use it. All right. So why don't we move on to what we're actually here to talk about? All right. So, as we said, the first thing we're going to talk about, we're going to start about talking about hate crime and hate incidents and understanding why hate crimes are treated differently than other crimes. All right? So the first part is we want to talk about what is a hate crime and get folks to help better understand what is a hate crime. And it's really pretty simple. You're going to hear that there's lots of complications about proving them, and that's true. But what is a hate crime? It's a crime where there is a motivation for committing the crime based on hate or bias. It doesn't have to be the only motivation. It can be a partial motivation. But it's a crime, and it's motivated, the motivation for that crime is at least partially based on hate or bias. And that is what results in a hate crime, okay? So it's generally a criminal offense. We're going to be, the kinds of criminal offenses that we're talking about: murder, assault, arson, vandalism, threats that are motivated by bias. Those are basically the sort of central content for, or the central heartland of what are considered hate crimes. On the federal side, there are major federal hate crime statutes that we use as our tools. And those include the Shepherd-Bird Hate Crimes Act, damage to religious property, obstructing the free exercise of religion, interfering with federally protected activities like voting, like serving on a jury, like the right to freely travel, the right to practice one's religion, and then, of course, interference with housing rights. Those federal crimes are crimes where if there is a protected class, okay? So that if there is a race, color, or national origin as a protected class, religion, disability, sexual orientation, familial status, sex, gender, and gender identity. Those are all what are considered the protected classes. And each of them interacts in some fashion with these statutes. Not every protected class is protected under each of these statutes. It's what we call a federal patchwork. And it's one of the reasons that we work very closely with our state counterparts, because a lot of times our state counterparts have in their own patchwork different tools or things that can fill certain gaps. And so, in addition to these federal hate crimes laws, what I'm going to do is I'm going to invite my partner, Mike Nemec, to come up and talk about the hate crime statutes that are in Connecticut.
Thank you. You want me to come over there? Or?
Wherever you want.
So, we do have a number of hi, my name is Mike Nemec. I'm an assistant state's attorney for the Judicial District, Stamford, Norwalk, geographical area 1. That includes Westport, Greenwich, Darien, Stamford, New Canaan, Norwalk, a couple of other towns. And my principal job, I prosecute criminal offenses that occur here in this jurisdiction. One of the things I do is if there's a hate crime or suspected hate crime, that generally comes to me. My boss, State's Attorney Forensic, is here. There are a lot of different types of statutes similar to the federal laws. You can see them listed there. I'm not going to read them off to you. And they are, as Anastasia was saying, they are based on activities based on where the intent or the motive or part of the motive is bias. And one of the difficulties we have is proving that bias. So we have to show what's inside someone's heart, which is very, very difficult to do. It's very hard to prove the intent. The best way we do that is through their actions, things they say, things they do, things they've done in the past. And I think they'll touch on that as well. So we look for that in any case. We have potential cases now where there are aspects of it that could indicate a pattern of bias type behavior, and we investigate that to see if we can prove it. And we examine the facts against the law, and if we believe we can prove it, we charge the case, and we go forward that way. So anything else specific you want me to hit?
No.
Is that good?
Just a little bit about the investigation and the cooperation between your office and law enforcement.
Yeah, we work extremely closely with law enforcement. We have to, especially in a crime like these. It's different very often. Sometimes it's more evident, but very often these crimes are harder to prove. They're harder to prove, and we have to do investigation. So we work very closely with our counterparts, the police department, the detectives, and the everyday patrol officers to gather the evidence if we need to apply for a warrant, do search warrants, get an understanding of the totality of the potential evidence that we can use. So we work very closely with them on a day-to-day basis to examine these potential crimes and punish them to the fullest extent of the law.
Okay. And I'll just follow up on exactly what you were just touching on, which is Mike mentioned Paul Forensic, who is the state's attorney. If you want to stand up and wave hello, that'd be great. Thank you. So our office and Paul's office have a good relationship, and that's true with the United States Attorney's Office and state's attorney's offices across Connecticut. And there are often times where there is an act that is a crime both on the state side and on the federal side. And so our offices, you as citizens are pretty fortunate to be in Connecticut because there is a degree of cooperation between the federal and the state authorities, not only on law enforcement, but also on the prosecution side. And so these offices work together to, as Mike said, ensure that offenders are prosecuted for all of the acts that they have committed that we can prove, and also to ensure that all of the resources of both agencies, both prosecutors' offices are brought to bear so that folks have to take full responsibility for the crimes that they have committed. And sometimes there's an analysis of whether or not that sentence or that crime that is going to be charged or to which someone's going to be pleading guilty, it's a choice between whether or not there's a higher or more serious penalty available in the state or more serious penalty available on the federal side so that these crimes can be treated as serious as they are. All right, so why hate crimes matter? I think you all know this in your heart, but it bears saying out loud. Why do we need to have hate crimes laws when the hate crimes are usually crimes themselves? And hate crimes are something where it affects not just the victim, but also the victim's group, that protected class. So not just their family and their friends, but their protected class, and then the community as a whole. And for those reasons, we are focused on hate crimes and want folks to be understanding that it is a priority for the department and for the state and for law enforcement. And hopefully for everybody who's here. So as I said earlier, just to review, we're talking a hate crime, we're talking about a crime where there is a bias motivation for that crime, and that's when we have hate crime. Here in Connecticut, we have had prosecutions under the hate crime statutes that we've talked about. One of those was the recent prosecution of Christopher Raskell. Christopher Raskell was prosecuted for interference with housing rights and threatening communications. And in this case, he was sending threatening text messages with anti-Semitic references, including references to the Holocaust. And he included statements that were threatening statements. And he ended up being charged by our office. That document you saw before, that is a federal indictment. That's what that looks like. When you see in the newspaper or read online that someone's been indicted, that's the document, that's what that looks like. And he was indicted, and ultimately, he pleaded guilty in federal court to one count of interference with the right to fair housing, which is, as we've mentioned, a hate crime, and carries a maximum penalty of up to 10 years of imprisonment. Now, he didn't ultimately get 10 years of imprisonment. He received a 2-year prison sentence, but just so you understand how serious these crimes are, that particular offense carried an up to 10-year term of imprisonment. Also, we prosecuted Mr. Ted Hakey, United States versus Ted Hakey. And as I mentioned, then Special Agent, Supervisory Special Agent Mike Butch was deeply involved in this case. I'm gonna let him come up here and tell you about what that was like.
Okay, good evening. I only have a few minutes here, so I'll try to be brief. But on November 14th, 2015, in the early morning hours, someone shot 4 rounds from a high-powered rifle into the Beit Ulaman Mosque in Meriden, right through about kind of yay high, right through the prayer area, kind of the main area of the mosque. And it happened to be a few hours after a major terrorist attack in Paris, France. Right after we heard this, hours after hearing about this, we responded to the mosque with the Meriden Police Department, the State Police, and immediately conducted a crime scene investigation. Now, I will say that this probably wasn't the most complex investigation I've ever been involved in, because when you looked at the trajectory of how the rounds entered the mosque, it led right into the backyard of the neighbor, and when we walked down the hill to the backyard of the neighbor, there were a bunch of shell casings. So we would call that a clue in law enforcement. So within a few hours, we had a search warrant from our partners at the U.S. Attorney's Office, and there were about 30 agents, combing through this house. And we removed an arsenal of weapons, thousands of rounds of ammunition, night vision goggles. There was a little chair up in the basement facing the window that looked out on the mosque. So a lot of great evidence. At that time, immediately, what we didn't have, as what Anastasia mentioned, is the motive, the hate for that crime. So again, working with the U.S. Attorney's Office, get a search warrant for Mr. Hakey, was the person who lived in that house, Ted Hakey's Facebook account, and when we get it back, it was overwhelming amount of hate speech related to Islam and Muslims. In particular, a number of statements like, the only solution is to wipe Islam off the face of the earth. So kind of right there, we've got our motive, our hate, and certainly overwhelming evidence. So Mr. Hakey was arrested in short order. Ultimately, it was a great case. He pled guilty and went to prison. So that was the case. I would say, community engagement, probably equally as important as the investigation was, this community was the Ahmadi Muslims, which at the time I didn't know a lot about, but it's a small sect of Islam where you have Sunni Muslims, Shia Muslims, which make up a far larger percent of Muslims, and then Ahmadis. And the Ahmadi Muslims in many countries, including Pakistan, are actually considered heretics by law. So some of the same people that were targeting the U.S., Islamic extremists, were targeting this community overseas. So many of these people had fled awful oppression to come to the U.S. to feel safe, and then this happens. And it's a small community, so this one mosque served the tri-state community. So they were terrorized. So a huge part of what we did was not only work the investigation, but engage with this community from the very first minutes of when we responded, to include, within a day or two, myself and one of their former colleagues, Sarah Nagala, now federal judge, were asked to come by the president to speak to their community at Friday prayers and talk about what we were doing for the investigation to keep them safe. And something, when there's an ongoing case, we can't get into everything, but we can tell them as much as we can. For example, in this case, I knew that we knew who did it. We had seized all his weapons. We were watching everything he was doing, so I could legitimately say, we don't believe there's a threat. The investigation is ongoing, but you are safe. And throughout the investigation, we continued to have regular dialogue with them. For example, instantly after we arrested Mr. Hakey, but before it got out in the press, I gave the mosque president a call to let him know, so he heard it from us that Mr. Hakey was arrested, and he didn't hear it on the news, on CNN or whatever. So these are the types of things, and I'll just say, this is what we always try to do in these types of cases, especially when it's a community that may be fearful of law enforcement, to build that relationship. And it's a relationship that lasts to today. And this is going back to 2014. So just a truly great group of people. And what I'll say about these people on a separate note is after he was arrested, got out on bail, before he was sentenced, they actually invited Mr. Hakey to come to the mosque to teach him about Islam. And he accepted. But just an amazing group of people. And this is the type of engagement we try to have with all of these communities that are victimized.
One of the things that I found incredibly moving was that, and I think it had in part to do with how much interaction there was and caring that was shown on the part of law enforcement, is that that community felt safe enough not only to invite Mr. Hakey in, but also, you know, that community ultimately expressed forgiveness for Mr. Hakey. They spoke on his behalf at his sentencing, and one of the members of that community was a regular visitor to Mr. Hakey while he served his prison sentence. So, you know, there is a lot of room for understanding, learning, forgiveness, and opening of everyone's hearts where there was a kernel, a seed, an awful act that was motivated by hate. As Mike mentioned, this is one of our evidence pictures from that case where the bullets entered the mosque. And one of the other excellent factors about this case is that it moved so quickly that there was an indictment returned in very short order. There are certain hate crimes cases that we are required here in the District of Connecticut to reach up to Washington, D.C. to get permission to charge those crimes as hate crimes, and this was one of them. And that can take a little bit of time, but the turnaround time on this case was incredibly fast. It was incredibly fast because of the work of the FBI and all of the information that they quickly amassed and went through, and we were able to get permission and charge quickly from Washington. So this was a success in so many different ways, this hate crime prosecution. And so now we're going to talk about, and I'm going to invite Bill up to talk about the fact that not all hate incidents are hate crimes. I'm going to turn the floor over to Bill.
Sure. Thank you, Anastasia. Hi, everybody. As Anastasia mentioned, my name is Bill Brown. I have the great privilege of serving as the Civil Rights Enforcement Coordinator for the Civil Division of our office. So when a hate incident occurs, it comes to our office. Many times, Anastasia and I will work very closely together because, as we'll talk about, not every hate incident becomes a hate crime, but sometimes it can develop into an act of hate discrimination, something on the civil side. So just like there are criminal statutes that Anastasia and these gentlemen prosecute, in those cases, someone's going to jail, right? But if it's not a crime, if it turns into an act of hate discrimination, it can come over to the civil side. And no one's going to jail in our cases, but we can, but there are very important tools in our toolbox because we can go after financial relief. We can get financial compensation for the victims. We can get civil penalties, which can be significant in the appropriate cases. And perhaps most importantly, we can get injunctive relief, which is such things as mandatory policies and procedures, mandatory training, mandatory monitoring, and things like that to ensure that whatever occurred doesn't happen again. So on the civil side, just wanted to introduce myself and let you know that you don't have to worry just because it's not a crime. There's other actions we can take, and in that arena we work very closely together on all fronts. So back to you, Anastasia.
Well, thanks. All right, so now we're going to get into the part of our presentation where we're going to ask you to do some thinking about various scenarios. All right, so what we're going to do, there we go, is I'm going to read out this scenario just in case there's anybody here who might have a little bit of vision concern or, like me, maybe didn't bring your glasses. And then we're going to ask you to vote, okay? So a group of protesters stand outside a bookstore that specifically caters to the LGBTI community. As a man exits the store, the protesters begin taunting him, calling him homophobic derogatory names. All right, so I want you to think about that for a minute. And then I want you to raise your hand if you think that this is a hate crime. All right, I see at least one hand out there. All right, now if you think that this is a hate incident, I want you to raise your hand. I see a lot of hands. My guess would be at least half the audience is voting hate incident. All right, and who out there thinks that this is discrimination? All right, I see at least half a dozen, 8, 10 hands. Okay. All right. Well, this is definitely a hate incident. Okay. Now, who thinks that this should be reported? I can tell you guys have been paying attention even since the beginning. Yes, definitely this is something that should be reported. All right. We're going to go on to another vignette. Oh, all right, so we have a question. Hold on. We're going to get you a microphone so everybody can hear you.
So
Thank
I'm
you.
the sole person who thought this was a hate crime, and I'm a former prosecutor. I'm a former ADA in the Bronx. I would think that this is still a hate crime if it put him in reasonable safety. It would really depend on the language that was used towards him, because it could potentially be a state-level harassment crime, no? Depending on the language.
So one of the things that is so very important that you're pointing out is that in terms of determining whether something is a hate crime, whether it's a hate incident that rises to hate crime, is additional information, right? And that's exactly what you're talking about. The need to collect additional information. What else happened? What else was heard? What was perceived? What if the person also had a baseball bat or was swinging a crowbar as they were making those comments, or made a movement towards the person who walked out of the bookstore? All of those additional potential pieces of information. And of course, how it made the person feel as they were walking out. And so just on the facts that we have, are we in hate incident land? And is there more to be investigated? Is there more that may ultimately reach the point where it can be prosecuted as a hate crime? Thank you. All right. Oops.
I would also just say that in Connecticut, we do have very, very strong First Amendment laws. So that is for us in prosecuting harassment particularly, you brought up harassment, so that statute particularly falls subject to the First Amendment laws that are in the state of Connecticut. So typically, there are exceptions. They're much harder to prove, and it's a much higher hurdle to overcome. Typically, hate speech, simple hate speech, is typically not a crime in the state of Connecticut. It's the First Amendment, it's the Constitution. The state Constitution protects it very strongly. You would typically need to see some sort of action associated with that speech, a physical action, as you said, placing somebody in fear of their physical safety beyond just the words. There are sometimes, very, very rarely, words can be enough, but it's very rare. Some of the most horrific, extreme language, simple language, can still be protected. So that doesn't mean you shouldn't report it. You absolutely should. I think you've probably heard that already enough times. So Connecticut itself has very strong First Amendment laws, which is why in that simple fact pattern, it probably wasn't a crime, but we would obviously have to hear a whole heck of a lot more, especially about weapons, actions, physical, bumping people, doing things that move it from just speech to action.
Mike, let me ask you a question. If this happened over and over again to patron after patron, or happened once a week over time, are those additional facts that matter?
That's a very good point. Thank you. Specifically for harassment, the volume, and your text messages, phone calls, harassments, the volume matters, right? So if you're receiving multiple, and even in a simple non-hate related harassment, if you're receiving an extraordinary amount, and it's not 6 is fine and 7 is bad, right? We have to look at the totality of the circumstances and understand the situation and everything, but the volume of calls or that kind of thing specifically does matter.
And so if they were to report this the first time, would that be the start of the documentation of the over and over?
Absolutely, and if there is something that happens in the future where one of the participants who's participated in this and is known to these fine gentlemen over here, and then there's an assault or something that goes beyond it, that now we have information about potential showing motive, showing that what I said, that intent, what is inside somebody's heart, which is very hard to prove. So that's why it's important to report these things as specifically as possible.
All right, thanks. All right, we're going to move on to the next one. All right, and I'll go ahead and read this one as well. A Cambodian-American passenger begins a trip booked on a ride-hailing service. As she enters the car, the driver says, "Another Asian riding with me today. I hope you don't have COVID." When the passenger exits, the driver says, "You shouldn't be requesting any more rides from anybody." Then, when they are removing her luggage from the trunk, the driver slams the trunk and narrowly misses her hands. All right, so take a minute and think about that. Okay, are you guys ready to vote? Who thinks that this is a hate incident? All right, I think I saw at least 25, 30 hands. All right, who thinks that this is a hate crime? All right, 1, 2, 3, 4. I've got at least 10 hands. Oh, I'm forgetting to look way up there by you guys. All right, now we've got at least 15 hands. All right, who thinks this is discrimination? Yeah, we got definitely a good solid 25. All right. Did you guys vote? All right, so this is a hate incident. All right, now, again, we have hateful words. We don't have enough information yet to indicate that a crime for certain took place. So what I'm going to do is ask you this. Imagine that as the passenger was retrieving her luggage, the driver suddenly slams the trunk down on her and narrowly misses her hands. Oops.
That was before.
Okay. All right. Mm-hmm. All right, so if the information now is, maybe there's a question as to whether it was accidental that he was, but if it's pretty clear to her that he was trying to smash her hand in the trunk and she managed to pull her hand out just in time, what do you think? Yeah, that's where the line starts to get crossed into hate crime. All right. Oh, good, I'm glad, I like it when we have questions. Do we, oh, hold on.
How do you know that it was intentional? Wouldn't you, this is like a he said, she said.
That's very true. And the most important thing is for the person that this happened to be able to describe to the law enforcement that they're reporting this to, and for the law enforcement to have the training and experience and patience to try and get all of those details, right? What was it specifically that the driver said? And when was that statement made in relation to when the trunk was slammed? And, you know, are there temporal connections to those things? And draw out all of the circumstances that surround these actions for law enforcement and the prosecutors to be able to determine if this is something that can be charged and hopefully proven as a hate crime.
Anastasia, can I also just add one thing here, because this could be a good example of what could be actionable discrimination, even if it falls short of a hate crime. If the driver said something along the lines of, I don't take Asians in my vehicle, so he was refused service because of his race or color, gender, whatever. That may be something where, it certainly would be something that we would want to know more about. I'm confident it would be something we would want to investigate, and that could be something where we bring an action, if necessary, against that company, because they could be held civilly liable for the actions of their driver who refused goods or services to an individual based on a protected status, i.e. in this case, their race or their color.
Bill, the sooner that it's reported and the sooner that the actions are documented and the statements are documented, how does that impact your ability to look into whether this is discrimination?
Well, I think in all cases, the sooner we get the report, the better. And that's true even if you, the reporter, once you decide to make the report, you don't have to know exactly what it is. You don't have to say to yourself, oh, this is hate discrimination, or this is just an incident, or this may be a crime. We just need the facts, right? And the sooner we have the facts, the sooner we can start investigating, the sooner we can round up documents, the sooner we can interview witnesses and things like that. The challenge is, if too much time goes by, people become unavailable, memories fade, and it can be much more difficult to investigate and find out the truth and do justice in a particular case.
And I will just say also, you said it's he said, she said, or he said, whatever. The testimony of one individual, one witness, is sufficient to secure conviction if they meet all the elements of the crime. So it doesn't have to be more than one person. I don't want anybody to see, oh, nobody's here to believe me. I don't have it on video. I don't have any, I don't have any proof, so to speak. The testimony of one witness can secure a conviction. So I don't want that to be an impediment for anybody to report these kinds of incidents. One witness is sufficient. Now, certainly, it's better when you have video and all the other what we would call circumstantial evidence to help. So it would depend on the fact scenario, but don't let the fact that it's only you or only one person speaking up be an impediment to you think that's not enough. It can be enough.
Chief Walsh, I want to give you an opportunity, since you are the front lines of the folks who often take these reports. Is it your department's policy or practice to take the report even if the person who's reporting doesn't know if they're talking about discrimination, hate incident, or hate crime?
Yes, of course. We would gather all the facts and have it fully investigated, even just obtaining surveillance video, canvassing for witnesses. Whatever witness is available, we'll gladly open those investigations and pursue them.
Mm-hmm. And when someone comes in to report, is this one of the first things you ask them? Did they record anything? Did they make any notes? Did they capture anything on their phones?
At times, sometimes it's best to get their direct from what their recollection is in their mind. And because sometimes the cell phone doesn't tell you everything. Surveillance video, independent witnesses, and things like that. So usually the human brain is the best provider of evidence.
Okay. All right. So now I'm going to ask the audience to vote again. Who thinks that they should report? I'm seeing the majority of you raising your hands. Who thinks that you don't report? All right, we still have some don't report. Okay, we're going to talk about that. All right, let's go on to our next scenario. A young African-American brother and sister are walking down the street. They pass a man who screams racial slurs at them. The man also begins swinging a crowbar at them and threatens to kill them. Who thinks that this is a hate crime? Good. I think we got everybody in the audience that time. All right. Report or don't report? Report. All right. Okay. Bill, I think it's your turn. Oh, all right.
A kid at school, and every day 2 or 3 people call him a fag and exclude him from their activities, whatever. What's that scenario? That's more likely to be an LGBT thing than some of these.
There we go. All right. Here you go. Do you want to stand up and do this one?
Sure. So, let me just go back here. So in this scenario, excellent question. A local transgender teenager is harassed and bullied for months at her high school based on her gender identity and finds a note on her locker that says, "You freaks don't belong here." The school principal had received a written complaint weeks ago, but takes no action for fear of negative publicity and losing his job. So exactly the type of situation you had envisioned. A student is being bullied based on his or her gender identity. A key fact here is that the school is made aware of it, received a credible complaint. Enough time had passed for the school to reasonably take some action, and in this scenario, no action was taken. This is an example, again, another example, I think, of something that could be actionable discrimination that our office or our counterpart in the Connecticut Attorney General's office, which handles civil complaints and also has a civil rights team within their office, would be interested to learn more about and in all likelihood investigate this type of claim.
What's the principal's responsibility in that case?
Well, an organization like a school has an obligation to take affirmative actions to prevent, detect, and deter unlawful discrimination within the confines of their facility. So in this case, what the scenario lays out is that the principal received a complaint weeks ago, although it doesn't say that there. For the purposes of this discussion, the principal received a credible complaint weeks ago, plenty of time to take some action. Ideally, they would have someone responsible to look into these things, to advise the principal. They can also reach out to us too. One of the great benefits of our office is one of the great resources that we have. Vanessa mentioned earlier that she reports to the Attorney General of the United States. Well, he has quite an impressive team down in DC. They have a number of experts in many different subjects and a number of different resources that we can reach out to. And they have resources that can come and assist the school. So let's say it's a smaller school or they don't have the necessary staff or training. The Department of Justice can put resources together. They can come out to your community and do training and education for the staff to help you through these things and prevent these types of incidents in the future, and could also engage with the local community. Yes, sir.
So a situation like this, it looks like it's complicated, right? Because you got this FERPA law and all this stuff. How do you guys deal with that? Because the principal, they don't reveal names when it's minors like this, right?
Yeah.
So how do you guys challenge that?
Yeah, it's a great question. That's why the investigations are so critical, because you're not going to get an answer overnight. You, in all likelihood, in a complicated situation like this, you're going to need to talk to many different people. As Anastasia mentioned before, we might have to go in and request people's cell phones if there were text messages that were part of the bullying. There might be people who have since graduated from the school. This might be the tip of the iceberg. There might be many more victims who are involved. And we conduct our investigations in a confidential manner. And we explain to people, look, when you come to us, you're telling us what you know in a confidential way, and we're going to protect that information. And in most cases, we don't ever have to reveal that because litigation becomes unnecessary. 9 times out of 10, we'll be able to find a mutual resolution with the school. And ultimately, you know, it's a terrible thing that these things happen, but they do happen nowadays. We all know that. But the vast majority of the time, we'll be able to reach a mutual resolution where the school puts things in place to not only correct what happened, but to prevent it from happening in the future, which is really the most important outcome that can come of one of these types of investigations.
Does this fall under Title IX because of the discrimination under, and does that stay in the civil?
Yes, it could. I'm not a Title IX expert, so if anyone here is, please help me. But if it's discrimination at a school based on gender, in other words, for example, the male athletes are getting favorable treatment as opposed to the female athletes, that could be a actionable civil discrimination claim. That's right.
Okay. So, report or don't report? Excellent. Right on. Okay. So, as you guys have figured out, whether it's a hate crime, whether it's a hate incident, whether it's discrimination, if it's not reported, it stays sub rosa. Law enforcement, civil and criminal, doesn't have the opportunity to do anything about it. And we have tools. I see another question.
Thanks. Just a quick question. In the different scenarios, I assume there are different places where you should report. I wonder if you could just mention where you should report. I mean, crime to the police, but discrimination, who are we reporting to?
Absolutely, absolutely. We're going to have a whole section of our presentation on reporting. All right. So, and this is exactly what thank you for the entree and the transition to understand how to report and the importance of reporting. So, your options. If it is an immediate danger situation like anything else, you're going to want to dial 911. But if it is not an immediate danger situation, you want to use your local police telephone number, okay? You can also report to the FBI and to the state police. Detective Alvin Chen is very eager to receive all of these reports. And then you can also report at justice.gov hate crimes and at the FBI. FBI has a tips line. We're going to show that in another line, in another slide in just a minute. But I want to turn, see, I told you we were going to show you the FBI site where you could submit the tips as well. Okay, so you're going to want to report all of this to law enforcement. And I'm going to tell you some stuff that you're going to want to include. We touched on this when we were talking about the taxi cab situation, and I am going to turn the floor over to Detective Chen in just a minute. But before I do, I want to talk to you about the kinds of facts that you want to make sure that you're thinking about to include. And if you're talking with a friend and you want to help them report, or a family member, these are the kind of things that you want to help them think about, jot down, make note of, okay? So, number one, is the victim part of a protected class? Were there comments made? Were they verbal comments? Are there written statements? Were there gestures that were made? Sometimes someone is feeling very emotional in the situation. They don't always remember that there were movements or gestures made by the person who committed the offense. Are there drawings or markings or symbols or graffiti? Does the person have a tattoo that was noticed by the victim? Is there membership in a hate group? Okay, that's very much something that maybe that there's some evidence of that the reporter can make, but often that's going to come from investigation by law enforcement. Were there previous hate crimes or incidents? Again, something that law enforcement will be looking into. And where did it happen? Where did this offense occur? Was it at a synagogue or a JCC or a church or a temple? Those are all factors that one should think about in terms of collecting the information and having it at the ready when the report is made. All right. Now, I do, at this point, want to turn the floor over to Detective Chen because in terms of reporting, the state police has a new unit and a new function. Would you like to talk about that a little bit? Great.
All right, my name is Detective Chen. Thank you, Anastasia, for inviting me. A little history about our unit is basically our state legislative created the Hate Crime Advisory Council, and we work under them, like work reporting to them. One thing I like to say to everybody is that hate crime is not a new thing. Everybody thinking the hate crime statute is a new thing. No, it's been there for many years. It's just now that we are focused on it. And a lot of times we notice everybody's like, oh, the cop's not gonna take it seriously. That's why I'm not reporting it. And that's what we call it no longer fly with us anymore. And we wanna take it serious. And everything, we like to say that we are working with the local department and the federal. I want everybody to leave here today to feel that, oh, one, not to say, feel like, oh, the cop's not gonna do anything. Yes, we do. We have a lot of incidents in this state, a lot of like flyer incident recruitment with a lot of, I don't wanna throw names in there, out there, but a lot of white supremacists, they don't like to recruit with a QR code. A lot of times when they throw into people's yards, they don't even know what it is. So they gotten creative now. They put it in a zipper bag so it doesn't get wet, and they put rocks in there. So a lot of people will see it like, oh, just a flyer. But now it's just a zipper bag now. It's a QR code, and then your children or whoever get a phone, easily just scan the QR code and down a rabbit hole they go. So what I'm getting at is, even though it takes a bias to rise to element of crime, but bias crime is not bias because it happens to all of us in this room, because that's why it's important that we focus on that. So back to our unit, right now, like every department, we are a lot of structure moving around. My sergeant just literally got transferred like last week. That's why I got selected to speak with you guys here. But even though, so since last year, we are focusing on hate incidents more now. So you don't need to feel like, oh, this might not be a hate crime, discrimination, bias crime. We don't care. That's our job. And on vice versa, I want you guys to, like a civilian, to be patient with us. So when we, let's say the state level, get involved and investigate, do our investigation, whatever outcomes we have, like concluded, I don't want, we have seen people like, no, this is the hate crime. You need, the local doesn't take me serious, I'm reporting to you, go do something. We are obliged by the law, same as everybody else. And you guys have the First Amendment, just like the First Amendment with the accused. So just be patient and work with us. And a lot of our local and state level, a lot of officers, troopers, they've been on the job for 15, 20 years. So they don't even know there is a bias form that they need to fill out. So what we call it is like a domestic violence. You have to, when the child's involved, you have to submit the form, send it to DCF. But on a big picture, you don't have to worry about any of those. Let us do our job. So you just have to report it. We will come out, and I could speak for the local departments here, that let us handle it, and don't feel like, you don't feel like we do anything, but we look into the cameras, see who's the offender, or even though it's not rise to a crime, but we are keeping a log of who those frequent flyers are. Like the incident earlier, that person might not be the first time. It might not be the 7th time that being reported that he or she has been doing this. Is a trend. So that alone, it builds a case for all these prosecutors. It builds more credibility. So in conclusion, just report to all of us and be patient with us. And it's only 2, 3 of us in the unit. And but just thank you.
Do you take reports by email? All right, is your email going to be up there at the end of the slideshow?
You have included?
Yes. All right. Oh, we have another question.
Maybe you're getting to this.
voice as of last time, but you talked earlier about how our level of protection, being a protected class, is a patchwork. We're not the same as, gay people do not have the same protections that people of religions have, people of different races have at the federal level. That's my impression, at least. Connecticut brings more protection to us. Where are the gaps? Where are the vulnerabilities that we should be worrying about where we're not covered as a protected class by one statute or another?
So I'm going to answer your question in two parts. One is that the Shepherd-Bird Hate Crimes Act covers or filled in a lot of those gaps. I'm not saying there aren't still gaps, and you are correct that there is certainly protection under Connecticut's laws in certain spaces where there is not as much protection on the federal side. But the other thing is that towards the end, I'm going to talk a little bit about the fact that on the federal side and on the state side, we have the full panoply of all criminal laws. And both on the state side and on the federal side, even if there's something that falls into one of the gaps so that we can't charge one of those major crimes that I put up there earlier, it doesn't mean that we can't prosecute it. What it means is that we can use an ordinary federal statute like arson, for example. And then when it comes time for sentencing, we have the opportunity to show the judge and put on evidence and ask for a hate crimes enhancement come sentencing. And the benefit, prosecutorial-wise, is that it's when you're proving things for sentencing, the burden of proof is not as high a requirement going into sentencing as it is going to a trial or proving beyond a reasonable doubt that a crime has occurred. So yes, there are gaps, but it doesn't mean that we are powerless to address the crimes. And it doesn't mean that we don't have the ability to bring to light and to bring in front of the court the fact that it was a bias-motivated event. Okay? All right. So back to reporting. We're going to have about at least 3 or 4 more slides of places where you can report. Also, I want to give a big shout out to Holly Wazalewski, who is our office's reentry and outreach coordinator. She, in conjunction with some other folks in our office and with assistance from David Heath, put together some beautiful pamphlets you guys can grab off the side table. It has a lot of information on the back about how to do reporting if we're talking about federal civil rights violations on the civil side or criminal side. But I would go back to, you're going to want to report to your local law enforcement first, and we'll get back to that. First, I want to talk about reported hate crimes by bias. As you may know, the FBI collects crime statistics every year, and that includes hate crimes, and they put out a special report on hate crimes. And so we recently got the statistics for 2021. When they first came out in December of 2022, they were a partial because there was a shift in the forms that the FBI was asking police to use to report those statistics. Between December and March the 23rd, they reached out to a lot of big departments around the country that hadn't made the shift by December. And so now there is a supplemental list. And I would tell you to go on the FBI site or the United States Department of Justice site. Both of them, if you go and you Google FBI hate crimes, United States Department of Justice and hate crimes, you're going to be able to find your way to the statistics. And if you want to get really deep into the statistics and geek out, there is so much data for you to look at. But just in the broad scheme, hate crimes from 2021, we see that 64.5% were race, ethnicity, ancestry of the victim was the bias motivation, or the perceived race, ancestry, or ethnicity of the victim. Same with sexual orientation. We see that that was the basis for 16% of what was reported. Religion was 14%. Gender identity was 3.2%. Disability was 1.4%. And gender was 1%. So those are percentages that are based on the supplemental stuff that just got published the 13th of March of this year. So that's the newest information about what happened in 2021. And as you may have already heard in the newspaper, that's a rise from 2020. I think that's what everybody sort of thought the news was going to be. And now that we have much better data, we know that that is what happened. If you're wondering about Connecticut, all these statistics show us that this is what's going on in Connecticut for 2021. There were 107 law enforcement agencies in Connecticut that reported to the FBI, which is the same number as 2020. And out of those 107 law enforcement agencies, there were 89 incidents reported. Of those, 60% were based on race, ethnicity, or ancestry. 9% were religion, 16% sexual orientation, 1% disability, 0 reports on gender identity and gender. So, oh, we have a question. Okay. Okay. Great. I love to hear that. So why is it that people are not reporting? We all, I think, understand and feel that there is an underreporting, right? If you go back and you look, there are 300 million people in the United States. And how many incidents were reported last year? 10,840. Does that seem like a really low number for how many people are in the United States? Yeah. That, to me, is sort of the most obvious indicator of underreporting. But there's research to talk about underreporting. There are 2 statisticians from the Bureau of Justice Statistics, and they looked at hate crime victimization for a period of 14 years. And then when they focused in 2015 to 2019, what did they learn about the reasons for not reporting? Handled another way, the belief that the police could not or would not do anything to help. They thought it wasn't important enough, fear of reprisal, or other. So those are the reasons why there's non-reporting or underreporting based on the research that was done. And so now, remember I promised you were going to get to talk to your neighbor? I want you to turn around and talk to at least 3 or 4 people sitting near you, even if you don't know them. And I want you to think about understanding this gap in reporting and hate crimes. What possible actions can you take? Can you as an individual envision taking, or you in groups that you know? What can you take to encourage victims to report hate crimes? And I'm going to tell you that I'm going to give you about 5 minutes to do this. We're going to end up having to borrow a little bit of time from you. I know we said we were going to end at 8 o'clock. But this is the good stuff. So if you guys would just take 5 minutes to talk to the folks behind you or next to you, and then we're going to ask from your little group that you find somebody, and we're going to have the microphone go around so that everybody can hear the other ideas the folks are coming up with. And if you need a partner, we'll come out and help you find a partner.
State police, it's like military. It's like a pressure. It's like what's this guy?
All right, I'm going to go
Coast Guard, so
sit on this.
California, and then kind of boarding down to the Caribbean.
Most of my time, about half. Mostly left to do the first time. Where are you? I went in right now. Actually, Georgia. Then went
talking? I thought I felt the stage vibrating. Oh, so distracted?
I feel like it too, right? So you have to do something.
Smart.
Oh, I can't live. I can't.
Yes, ma'am. Okay. Same as me. Has it been 5 minutes yet? This sounds like good conversation. Sort of sad to break it up, but we gotta keep moving. What do you think, another 30 seconds?
No hoops on.
I got babies to diaper.
I'm sorry. We're close.
They're asleep.
We're close.
My wife's like, where are you?
I am in front of 75 people wanting to hear what I have to say. Right?
2 girls. 2 boys.
Okay. All right. So we have, is it now 5 minutes? Okay. Okay. No. I want you to have at least 1 more minute, please.
That's it. And there we go.
I'm gonna have to go around. Oh, I'll be right back.
I guess it's good as mine. I think so.
Sorry.
Charlie wants to take your picture. You gotta smile, guys. All right. All right. I think that you guys have plainly gotten deep into this assignment. I'm really excited about that. And we have a microphone so that we can start hearing what you have for ideas.
So we talked about that some communities are not as trusting of local law enforcement. So there are state and federal ways that you can report, or even if there's like a 1-800 number that community members can call to report these incidents, so that at least bare minimum they are being reported and there is a paper trail.
Excellent. There is a 1-800 number. It's going to be on the screen in a little bit. All right. Who else? I know that I saw other folks out there. Oh, here we go. 3 rows, 4 rows back.
I would say that we are becoming more and more disconnected in our communities. We all live next door to people, and as when I grew up, my neighbors, I knew who my neighbors were. If there was something wrong, my neighbor lady would call my mom and tell my mom. And nowadays, we don't even know the person who lives next door to us, and nor do we want to know them. I think if you start back in the day where there was neighborhood watch, and people had like a Tuesday night meeting and you brought over potluck and you talked and you knew who your neighbors were, then you could be supportive to each other if something happened and encouraging. But now we've gotten to the point that we've gone insular and just not say, well, it's none of my business, well, that's them, and I don't. Even the smallest thing of correcting a child, tearing up library books, now we look at the kid and said, I wouldn't say anything because their parents will yell at me. We've gone away from those simple things of being connected in community.
Do you think that there are steps that can be taken to combat that insularity and to reach out and be available as a resource to help others in the community to report?
Absolutely. I think a simple thing is just meet your neighbors.
There we go.
Just say, when someone moves in, we still take flowers over a basket, bring food over, and say something. If your lawnmower's not working, you say, you know what, you can borrow mine. That we just do a simple thing of just, hello, I live next door to you.
Great. I know I saw, oh, there we go, in the back.
I was very concerned to find out that our local police union supports certain political candidates over other political candidates. How can any of us feel that we're going to be treated fairly by people who make these biases known?
All right. So raising questions like that, I'm going to take an opportunity right here to turn this over to Police Chief Walsh, and I think he has something that might address that, and he will have an opportunity also to introduce the person who's joined us up on the stage now.
Thank you for that question. Political unions, police unions have the right to endorse a candidate. The administration of any police department has the right and the responsibility for accountability and oversight of all police practices. So the union has their rights, but we overall have the overall burden to assure good behavior, discipline, and accountability within any organization. And I also would like to take this opportunity to thank the Department of Justice and Westport PRIDE for getting everybody here in one room tonight. It creates an opportunity for the key word of bringing that safe space back to local law enforcement, where people feel welcome to walk into any police department to dial 911 on the local level, or call me. Personally, I've always been very transparent and open with members of all members of the Norwalk community, very transparent, very open. There's the avenues for communications within Norwalk are open, and I think we create a safe space for everybody to come to the Norwalk Police Department. I would also take this opportunity to recognize Lieutenant Joe Dinho, who is the commander of our Community Services Division. He oversees community policing and community services. And Officer Samantha Bardos. Sam is a 5-year veteran of the Norwalk Police Department. She is our LGBTQ liaison. She liaisons with many organizations throughout the city of Norwalk, the Pride Festival, the NICE Festival, and other organizations that sponsor community events within the city of Norwalk. And we're proud to have Samantha with us here tonight.
And just to be clear, when you were mentioning earlier the discipline and the policies and the accountability of the people in the police department, is that divorced from a union's political activity?
Could you repeat that, please?
Sure. I just to address her question. So one of the things this Norwalk Police Department does to make sure that folks in the community know that they are a receptive and understanding police department is that you have a liaison officer for the LGBTQ community, right? And so she's available, she goes out and she interacts with various parts of the community, but also is within the department as well. And if someone were to come in and we're feeling sensitive about a certain situation, is Sam available then to be present when someone is reporting, say, for example, a hate incident?
Yes, Sam is always available. She's a crisis negotiation member. She's on 24-hour call. She's a CIT officer. She always avails herself to make always availability 24 hours a day. And in regards to endorsements and such, we assure that none of the bias or political bias that anybody feels towards one candidate doesn't carry out into the application of their duties.
Right, so the politics of a union doesn't have to do with the department's policies and the department's treatment of the public, correct?
Correct.
Oh, I see a question way in the back.
No question. Oh, sorry, that was loud. So I had the discussion that we had, some things that we came up with was publicizing how easy it is to call and report it. So if we saw more signs, that'd be good. And just like when you go to the airport, see something, say something. We now know what that looks like, so if there was something around that more. And then my last thing that I would say was brought up earlier about trusting the police force. And I would think, what are we doing to diversify our law enforcement? Because when I look at the stage here, I don't see much diversity. So then, therefore, I would say, given how diverse our towns are, how come the police force doesn't look as diverse as our town? So therefore, there must be a bias going on there or something's happening. So what are we doing to ensure that we're diversifying the police force that reflects the communities that you're protecting?
Well, I will, go ahead, Chief Walsh.
Thank you. We work with local community stakeholders such as Brenda Penn Williams, the NAACP president to attract and recruit many diverse candidates. We've also worked with the IMF, a group of reverends and ministers within the city, to recruit diverse candidates. We just started a whole recruitment drive March 1st. Recently took out ads in forums all throughout the United States, trying to recruit from all venues, a very diverse background of all applicants. We always try to represent, or even more, the numbers to represent the population of Norwalk. Currently, the city of Norwalk is right at those numbers. We also try to create the face of the police department to attract more diverse candidates and to create avenues for promotion and testing so some of these officers can work their way up through the chain of command. Understood.
All right, I see another comment right down here.
So I'm going to go a little out of the box here. If there's not a report of, let's say, a hate crime, but there's a suspicion of that hate crime, the first part of this question would be, would you guys be monitoring something if it was really horrific? And the point, the area where I'm going to is the situation that happened in Wilton about a week ago. You guys probably heard about that. The murder with the African-American gentleman. That situation, to me, my eyebrows went up big time, because I don't know why the gentleman did that to that particular gentleman. He's a new resident. He just came into the W's. I call them Westport and Wilton. He just came there. There's no history of neighbor confrontation. And I'm curious about it. I don't know if the prosecutor, state, or any of you guys are looking into it. I know it's a different jurisdiction, but is any of you guys thinking about this case? I'm not sure.
Absolutely. So that horrific crime happened in our jurisdiction. I know I am personally not involved in that case. That's not my case, so I'm not personally involved in it. I don't know all of the intimate details of it. I know Attorney Forensic, who is here, he's handling, I believe you're handling that case, Paul?
We are obviously very perplexed why he did this. We're exploring a mental health issue with the assailant. But from what I know, it's been bantered about. That's obviously something we thought of when it first happened. But I could just say this: there's no indication that there was any kind of racial animus involved in this. But we are. It obviously comes to mind when you have a case like that. I don't believe they said it explicitly. They put his name. It's a Nigerian name. You could tell by looking, right. Yeah. It's been explored. I can't say that. I could just say this: we have uncovered no direct evidence of that this was a biased crime. So that is something we thought of, though, and the Wilton police.
I believe the Connecticut Post had a fairly detailed article on the victim in that matter. I think it was the Connecticut Post. They did a fairly, because I read it in the paper, and it was a very moving article. And
what culture he was. The name came out. Obviously, people assumed or knew right away this is not just a Caucasian guy, right? And when you look at him, he doesn't look the typical black image, I guess. But I was familiar with what he looked like, and I knew right away in my mind, I'm like, this doesn't look right. But I don't know if most people knew he was black. He didn't.
Oh, I see another hand. Thank you.
Okay, I'm sorry because I talk a lot, and I'm ironically, and my group is one of our state representatives and our state senator, and I'm definitely not any of that. But we largely discussed, the idea of having to grow a thick skin, feeling like you're supposed to sort of power through it grow a thick skin and deal with it, regardless of whether it's racial, gender identity, religion. But also the idea of fear of coming forward as a victim and what is going to happen to you during the prosecution process, because of course there's a lot of pressure on a victim. And even the idea of reporting something that's happening to somebody else, we were discussing, there's a reluctance to do that because the other person may not want to proceed. So it would be really helpful, in my opinion, if you guys, all of your organizations, could partner with our communities to send a message that you take care of your victims, that you provide services for victims, and that you will back up your victims. And I'd be very curious to hear what you guys have. I know, obviously, the U.S. Attorney's Office has a whole victim services unit. But I...
Okay, so I won't get to do the 5-minute speech on we have amazing victim witness unit. I will let Mike talk in a little bit because the FBI also has dedicated victim witness folks. And then I'm going to turn it over to Mike because I know that he has some stuff to add on that front.
This is off. People definitely need to know that they're not alone in coming forward. And I think that message has to get out for people to start reporting.
I would agree. So, Mike, do you want to talk a little bit about the victim witness support that the FBI has?
Yes, I'll say in Connecticut, we have a full-time victim witness coordinator in our office. That's all she does. Highly trained, amazing woman, Courtney Litowitz. We're actually trying to get a second because she's so busy. But they play an absolutely critical role in our investigations.
And I will say that Courtney works in conjunction with the Victims Witness Unit in our office. And if a matter goes to trial, or even if it's going to a plea, the folks in our office and Courtney will be there sitting side by side in the courtroom with the victim so that they can be present and see what happens. They also keep them informed all the way through so that if they say, look, I'm willing to report what happened to me, I don't ever want to have to go into a courtroom if I can avoid it. Our victim witnesses, advocates, work and listen super carefully to that and do everything that they can to protect them from all of that information. They simply say, okay, what do you want to know? I will tell you what you want to know. If there's a part of a trial that you want to be present for, I will sit there with you for that part. I will sit through the trial for you and report back to you what happens, assuming they're not going to be a witness who's sequestered. But they are sensitive to the wide array of different feelings that victims have at different times in the process, and receive a ton of training about how to best support the victims as they're going through that process. I'm also going to turn it over to Mike because I promised him a little floor time.
So in Connecticut, there's the Office of Victim Services in the state of Connecticut. There are statutory and constitutional rights for victims in the state of Connecticut. I will say that in my job, a very, very large part of my job is liaising and talking to victims. We have a tremendous victims advocate in the Stamford Courthouse. Her name is Kat Dowd. She works with victims of essentially non-domestic crimes. There are victim services available. The Domestic Violence Crisis Center in Stamford, and there are different organizations in each town. And I don't have all the names at my fingertips, but each region has, in a domestic case, there are domestic violence advocates that work with victims or complainants. Sometimes we call them complainants in the court. And there are statutorily created services, potential. You can seek financial compensation for damages for certain things. So that it's all created by statute. So there's really, the Office of Victim Services is the state agency in Connecticut that deals with all of that. There's really an incredible amount of resources for victims, and we take a victim's position very, very seriously. It's a lot of what we do is talking with them and understanding their position and understanding trying to work with them. I will say that we have a bit of a, we serve two bosses, so to speak. We take victims' opinions and desires very, very seriously, and they're very important to us. But we also sometimes have a greater duty because a victim's opinion works both ways. They can be in favor of prosecution and against prosecution. And we take our duty to, as when Anastasia opened this, talking about doing justice. That is something that we in our office take extraordinarily seriously. And our clients, so to speak, are also the people of the state of Connecticut, and making sure that individuals that commit these crimes receive the consequences necessary to help prevent them from committing them again. And sometimes that goes against what the victim in the case wants. And so we do have two sort of mandates. So it's not like we just do whatever they want us to do, but it is, I want everybody here to know, and anybody that's listening, their opinion and their position is wildly important to us. And it's something that we do a lot of work to understand and to explain the process to, and try to work with victims so that they understand to help them understand what they're going through.
I think my point is that, so I actually know all this, but the general public. So I know that you guys provide these services. I knew it walking in the door. What I'm saying is that the general public does not know. And I think that you will see reporting increase if you put up some billboards or buy some signage on the sides of buses that says, we support victims, we will protect victims, because they're afraid.
Thank you. That is very helpful, and I appreciate it. The other thing I want to also say is that we also try to, our victims advocates unit, and you probably know this too, but I'm sharing this so that everybody can understand, is that we work with community groups like Love 146 and a variety of other community organizations to be able to connect victims with services that are not provided exclusively by our victim advocates, but other folks to help them if there are situations that would be an organization has services that would be helpful to that victim. All right. I am so grateful. Oh my goodness, this is awesome. Go ahead. We have two more. We'll go start here and then come over to you in the middle, if that's all right.
Yeah, my question is about where's the prevention? Because we know that incarceration sometimes contributes to more crime and recidivism. So, are there any programs involving restorative justice, even in conjunction with a prosecution and a conviction? But just kind of where's the prevention and getting out in front of this?
Thank you. That is an awesome question. And again, an awesome transition to the third part of our presentation. One of the things that I do want to do, just to answer you directly, yes, restorative justice is being piloted in the federal court, in Bridgeport here. Here, we're in Westport, but in Bridgeport, it's being piloted right now. So there's a lot of research going into restorative justice, and even on the federal side, we are looking at how that can be incorporated. And we also, as I think you heard mentioned earlier by David and Vanessa, we have support court and reentry court. Both of those are federal court programs that are in each seat of court. So there's a reentry court in Bridgeport, one in New Haven, one in Hartford, the same for support court, which is like a drug court. All of those are headed up by federal judges and are a lengthy program in conjunction with where people are being prosecuted, and all of them are recidivism really directed at a third leg of the stool to help reduce recidivism. I'm also going to talk about, or I'm going to turn the floor over to Mike because the state has some awesome programs that they have the ability to require of people who are convicted.
So especially in convictions for specific hate crimes, it's a requirement by law. If you're put on probation for a hate crime, there is an educational component to your probation that you're required. There's something called it's not the exact title, but it's essentially a hate crimes accelerated rehabilitation, where for lower level offenses, where the judge finds that it's not so serious as to preclude the granting of the program, and the offender is unlikely to offend again, has no criminal record, they could enter into this program where there would be an educational component in that. And there are a number of sort of what we call diversionary programs in the state of Connecticut for other types of crimes, alcohol-related crimes, drug-related crimes, domestic violence-related crimes. So we have a lot of programs like these that are one of the judges in our courthouse refers to as a treatment track instead of a punishment track. So there are a large number of them. We don't have enough time to talk about all of them tonight, but there are a large number of those things. Connecticut is at the forefront of these, of doing these things.
All right. Okay. We are getting very low on time, and I'm so grateful and pleased to see that you guys are all still here. And I see that we have another comment of somebody who wants to share. And so we're going to hear from you. But I also want to get into exactly what you just mentioned about prevention. And I think we're going to try and fly through this last part. But I want to hear from you first.
Perhaps somebody up there can answer this. There has been a surge in hate graffiti in Westport recently. What is being done about it?
I think I can take that one, finally. I've been waiting for an opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Deputy Chief Paulson. We knew you were here.
So yeah, Deputy Chief Ryan Paulson with the Westport Police Department. So thank you. Yeah, we have seen that, and we've noticed that. So what we're seeing is 3 specific areas that have been targeted with spray paint or markers. The messaging that's on these, whether it's a bridge abutment or inside of a porta potty or on a picnic table, is relating to messaging relating to white supremacy, so to speak. For some examples, it would be, "It's okay to be white" was written on a piling, or something along the lines of diversity equals anti-white behavior. So we are seriously looking into this, and this comes along with the reporting aspect of this. I don't want to give you all the proactive measures that we're doing. I can assure you that we're taking some very serious proactive measures rather than just patrolling the areas. I don't want to give a lot of that away because we are hoping to catch who's involved with this, so give me that leeway to kind of keep that close to my chest. But when we're talking about reporting, and especially in the cases when we're talking about this graffiti, you may see something and either figure someone else reported it, or maybe you're reluctant to come forward, but you may have the piece of information that we need to narrow this down and then and put a stop to it, or at least push it over to the state's attorney's office for prosecution. So I can't say enough how important that is for us. And I think you've kind of heard the tone here that a lot of these cases can be very challenging. And information is key. So the more information we have, the better case we can put together, the better collaboration with the state's attorney's office, and the better outcome ultimately in the end. So I know I'm kind of a little vague on what's going on, but we are very aware of it. We are very on top of it, and we're looking for help from the community, but also, with the proactive measures that we're taking, we're hoping something comes to light soon. It is the most honest I can be about it.
Okay, I see another question.
Thank you. You said it's a safe place. Let me ask a non-safe question. The U.S. military is engaged in filtering out, trying to identify extremists, oath keepers, white supremacists of various kinds. Are the police departments, FBI, State Police, are they also trying to filter out these extremists? As you're mentioning white supremacist graffiti, how do I know if I'm reporting to a police officer or an FBI agent that I'm not reporting to an extremist, that I'm not reporting to an oath keeper?
Chief, do you want to talk about accountability a little bit?
Sure, thank you. Our background investigation of any candidate lasts 8 to 10 weeks. Part of that background investigation includes a psychological, a polygraph, access to all their social media. We go through all their social media going all the way back. It also includes a full canvas of their neighborhood, all their references, all their employment history. So we do a very exhaustive background investigation. We do weed out a lot of candidates that show a behavior that is not suitable for being a police officer. Most of that is exhibited through some social media posts, some indicators in the polygraph is very useful, and the psychological. So we do a very exhaustive check to weed out all those unsuitable candidates.
I'm sorry, I have to say something. I have a former student who was a Norwalk police officer, and never did I know that he took a picture like this, standing around people who had white hoods on. You can do the background check, but I think this was a very good question. You can't weed people out through the psychological and just an interview.
We do our due diligence based on the best practices to weed out everything. We understand that. And they come from society, and we do our best to weed out all unsuitable candidates. And if any information is exposed, once they do get hired, we will try to separate them from employment. Most of our recruitment is done on social media. So we, unfortunately, with society today, we lack the human recruiting as it was in place 30 years ago. So most of it's done through social media. In regards to who scrutinizes the background investigation, it goes through 2 levels of deputy chief. I read the background investigation. Each police commissioner reads the background investigation and include the mayor. The final step of hiring in the city of Norwalk is a panel interview with the police commission and the mayor to include the chief and the 2 deputy chiefs upon reading their background investigation, which usually averages about 4 to 6 inches in 2 binders. So it's quite exhaustive.
Okay. I am so eager to hear what you have to say, and I know that we are a little short on time. So after this last comment, we're going to scoot on to the next, to the last little bit so that everybody can hear the importance of prevention and last bits that we have to say and share.
Thank you. I was just going to say that sometimes some of the incidents involve young people, minors, happen in schools, and if you could just frame some of what you say, what you tell us about coming up, about what people should do if it's happening inside a school.
All right. So we absolutely can. And Bill, do you want to touch on that real briefly while I get our next slide ready?
Sure. I think the message is the same, whether it's happening in the school. The idea is to report, give whoever you decide to report to as much information as you can, names of others who might have additional information, and hopefully you can do that promptly, and an investigation will come about.
The other thing that I will just add on to that super quickly is that there are a number of groups that provide educational services where things have happened in schools. And so schools, for example, can invite in the ADL to engage in some education for the folks in that community. There are other organizations that also can go in and do that, and that there are sort of two angles for stuff that happens in schools. That's Department of Justice and Department of Education. And our office and the Department of Education representatives are often in contact so that what happens in schools can be addressed through a federal resource to the extent that they're available. Okay. All right, so just very quickly, law enforcement's role. You have seen that there's a whole lot of law enforcement up here, to include the majority being local law enforcement. You know that we have, of course, local police in your city and town, like Chief Walsh and his entire department, including Sam Bardos. We also have Deputy Chief, you saw also Chief Koskinas here, and their entire department, including some folks over there, I think. And so in addition to local law enforcement, we also have the state police across Connecticut, and in particular, the Hate Crimes Unit, which is a new and special and on the forefront resource that we have here in Connecticut. And of course, the state's attorney's office, who works with all of them and with us on the federal side. One thing that I'm gonna throw in very quickly is that the FBI works with local and state law enforcement and with the state's attorney's office, agents under Mike that are investigating hate crimes. Even if it's not gonna be something that we prosecute federally, they are still available and provide information and resources so that those investigative resources are used in prosecutions on the state side. On the federal side, of course, we have the FBI and federal prosecutors. I want to take very quickly the opportunity to do a shout out and ask our newest civil rights prosecutor, Shan Patel. He has deepened our bench enormously at the U.S. Attorney's Office. We are very lucky that he has come from Washington, D.C. in the civil rights section, where he spent 15 years across the country prosecuting hate crimes and civil rights violations. So we feel enormously lucky to have Sean here devoting all of his resources to Connecticut. And plus he brought my power cord tonight. Also, as I mentioned before, there are non-civil rights statutes that we often draw upon, including use of fire during the commission of felony, also known to most of us as arson, interstate threats. Because we are federal prosecutors, we need threats to either be interstate or using an interstate facility. Crimes that occur on federal land, use of a minor to commit a crime of violence, felon in possession of firearms, cyber stalking. These are all felonies, which means that they are punishable by more than a year of imprisonment, meaning that they are what the Constitution refers to as high crimes. And so in terms of seriousness, we have federal tools that enable us to look at serious crimes and have serious repercussions for those crimes. There are other parts of the DOJ that are also focused on addressing hate crimes, including the FBI, the Civil Rights Division, where Sean came from, the U.S. Attorney's Office here in Connecticut that you got to meet our leader, Vanessa, tonight. Community Relations Service. I want to very briefly tell you about the Community Relations Service. This is a very valuable part, but a very sort of not well-known part of the Department of Justice. This is what is called America's Conciliator. And they go out to hotspot situations, like Ferguson, for example, things where there may be a flashpoint, and they put into the room all of the parties and help hear everybody and help everybody feel heard in an effort to avoid violence. We have had them here in Connecticut for many years. They help us in all sorts of situations, like the one that you mentioned where something happens in a school. Sometimes it's Community Relations Service that is the resource resource that can be deployed to a school where there's community anger about something that happened in a school or at a football game or exiting a football game or something like that. And then, of course, COPS, the Community-Oriented Policing Services, part of the Department of Justice. There is a hate crimes website from the Department of Justice that's very specific. I just want to highlight that for you if you're tooling around and you want something better than YouTube. There's immense resources and information and statistics and press releases so that you can know across the country, all of the prosecutions that are being successfully brought with regard to hate crimes. So, of course, I asked you before to talk about things that you can do individually. So you learned tonight to recognize hate crimes and hate incidents. You now have learned and internalized, don't hesitate to report. You understand, thanks to our friend who is a prosecutor from New York, that we have victim services and that we support our victims. And so, you know, we also have a full array of cooperative law enforcement on the state, local, and federal side. So don't hesitate to report. As we mentioned, utilize those resources to support victims. Now you all know that those exist. And build strong relationships. To your point, what is it that we can do to prevent? One of the things that we can do to prevent is everybody work to figure out who your local law enforcement is, how to have organizations form relationships with those local law enforcement. All of these folks are here today because somebody in this community said, hey, we're gonna do this. Are you willing to come? It's not because Vanessa and I called up and said, you have to come. It's because law enforcement, because they were reached out to by an individual in their community who said, hey, we think this is going to be important information for the community. Would you come and join us? And they said, by all means. And so that's why they're here tonight. All right. So these are the things I'd like you guys to talk about. What steps can I take to prevent and respond to hate crimes in my community? And is there anything I can do before I leave the building tonight? To begin. All right, I got one right over here. All right, could you repeat that so everybody can hear me?
Meet new people. Make sure that you introduce yourself to the chiefs here and to at least a couple of people that you don't know so that we start to, Sonia's point, I think, to break down barriers and create community because we're all in this together.
Exactly. All right. And of course, we also would like you to think about, and then we heard some of this already, is there anything that DOJ or any of us as law enforcement can do better to encourage reporting of hate crimes? Now, one of the things that we're going to do is we're going to ask you to give us feedback. So if you want to take out those phones that you silenced and take a picture of the QR code, this is where you can share your feedback with us. And we very much encourage you and would like you to share your feedback. All right? And if I'm in your way, I'll happily move. All right. We have had awesome interactivity. You guys have asked a lot of questions. I would definitely encourage you, if you have more questions, that all of us are going to be over there, and you can, by all means, ask more questions of any of the folks that are up here or their colleagues who are over there, or I'm even going to volunteer Vanessa, and we have some more folks from the US, or Sean. I'm sure that he has some interesting information if you guys are interested. Two more photos for you. One is, this is the contact information. Who was asking how to report? These are absolutely resources for you. These are people that you can contact to make reports, and if it is not relevant to their jurisdiction, they will get it to the right people whose jurisdiction it goes to. Okay, and then The very last thing is that, I'm sure you all know this, we are protecting Connecticut and the communities in Connecticut together because you all have come out, have learned this. I want to encourage you to share it and to help continue to protect Connecticut together. That has the 1-800 number. Who had the 1-800 number idea? Here's the 1-800 number for you. 1-800-CALL-FBI or submit tips at tips.fbi.gov. I want to thank you guys so very much. I want to thank Vanessa for coming out and supporting us tonight. And most importantly, I want to thank Brian McGonigal and Carrie Gorelick and our fabulous microphone purveyor for such a great opportunity and a great facility. Thank you very much.